50 or so years later, Daniel refused to obey a law that required him to stop praying to God and, instead, to pray to a king. But people have no authority to tell other people how to worship God. Since God made us, and since He owns us, only He has authority to tell us how to worship Him. Daniel 3, 4 and 6. The Kingdom of God and Religious Liberty. Video number 8. The Limit of Human Authority, Daniel 3, 6. Have you ever wondered how the first human governments came into existence? God authorized mankind to create governments even before there were enough people to do so. In fact, when Noah came out of the ark, while there were only 8 persons living on earth, God told Noah that if someone committed murder, society should put that man to death for destroying God's image in the murdered man. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. Genesis 9:5, 6. Initially, each city was an independent government. Later, groups of cities combined together to form nations. Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon were 3 of the earliest groups of cities to form nations. It was when they began to form such nations that writing in clay became more common for record-keeping purposes. How much authority does God grant to the governments of earth? It is not an infinite amount. From the stories of Daniel we clearly see the limits of this God-granted authority. In these stories, we see that the governments had authority to make prisoners and to make slaves. God's faithful people sometimes become prisoners and the slaves because they are faithful to God and His laws. But when the laws required the slaves to eat unclean foods, like pork, or to drink wine, the prophet Daniel decided in his heart that he would obey God's laws and not obey the human laws. This important decision did not make him arrogant or rude. He politely requested permission to practice his dietary habits. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel 1:8. Again, when the laws of Babylon required Daniel's friends to attend the dedication of the huge idol, they attended. But when the law required them to kneel down to the huge idol, they would not do it. They put God's laws always above the laws of man. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Now if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Daniel 3:15-18. 50 or so years later, Daniel refused to obey a law that required him to stop praying to God and, instead, to pray to a king. But people have no authority to tell other people how to worship God. Since God made us, and since He owns us, only He has authority to tell us how to worship Him. Consequently, Daniel did not obey the law. Instead, he prayed every day to God, in the same way he always had done before the new human law. What we learn in these stories is an idea that all wise men recognize as true. There is a limit to the authority of earthly governments. When you must choose between following the authority of God's laws or following the policies of our national government, we should always follow God's unchanging laws. Even in details as small as diet and prayer, we are not permitted by God to follow the earthly government, especially when it forces us to disobey God. In a military situation, if two higher officers give you conflicting commands, it is always easy to know which one to obey. You obey the one with the higher rank. In the same way, we should obey government, as it has a higher rank than us. But when it conflicts with God, God has a higher rank than any earthly government. We should always obey God. This is what the apostles have said. When they were challenged by the leaders of their city and asked why they dared disobey, this was their answer. But Peter and John answered and said to them, "Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you judge." Acts 4:19. Jesus addressed this issue also. The Jews hated paying taxes to the Romans, but they wanted to trap Jesus. So they asked him whether they should pay taxes or not. Of course we should pay taxes. If God has authorized governments to operate, he must have authorized them to collect taxes to pay their bills. When they had come, they said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true, and care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, or not? Shall we pay, or shall we not pay?" But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, "Why do you test me? Bring me a denarius that I may see it." So they brought it. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus answered and said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. Mark 12:14-17. The summary of what we have learned from Jesus, from his apostles, and from his prophets, is that we must do our civil duties. We must obey every rule that our nation makes, but there is a limit. When our nation requires us to disobey God's law, or when it interferes with his requirements for worship, we must not submit, rather, we follow God. For to submit to a religious law that differs from God's law is to worship the men who made it. In this case, we must obey God, rather than man.